Today's project will be replacing the brake shoes for the parking brake on the 2008 Mitsubishi Lancer GTS. These are all the items that you're going to need to be able to do this job. A hydraulic lift is going to be very helpful, but you can use the jack that came with your car. Some jack stands here are a safety precaution. Once I have the hydraulic jack up, I'm going to put those jack stands underneath the car as well. I'm only going to be doing one set at a time though. I'm going to be putting these wheel chucks underneath the front tires since we will be releasing the parking brake to do this job. I'm going to be wearing nitrate gloves underneath my impact gloves to protect my hands. I'm going to be using these tools here to remove the caliper and these tools here to remove the tire. These pliers will be used for stretching the springs into position, and the flathead screwdriver will be for removing the old springs. Here's a new set of the springs and other various parts that you'll be replacing during this job. And overall, it should take less than an hour to do this. The hardest part of the job is stretching those springs and putting everything back into position. Before you jack your car up on the stand, you go on to loosen your lug nuts first. Now that they're loosened up, let's go ahead and lift this car up. The next step is to remove the lower bolt from the caliper. To do this, you're going to need the rubber mallet, the breaker bar, and a 14mm socket. This is the lower bolt and this is the upper bolt. We only need to remove the lower bolt. There's this rubber piece here that will come off sometimes. It just pops right back on. Just set it aside for now. And then you can slide the caliper up and remove the back brake pad. There's metal clips that hold it in place, so just slide it outwards and set it aside. This brake pad can remain clipped in here. Now this probably will swing back and forth. It's okay, just hold it there. Now your rotor should slide right off. Mine's not sliding off because the parking brake is still engaged. Now that we've disengaged the parking brake, we have to be careful not to rock the car around too much because the other tire, while it's still touching the ground, is not secured. That's why we have the wheel chucks. Let's take a moment and talk about the individual components of the parking brake. On either side, you have the shoe and lining assembly, here and here, and then all the remaining components that came in your kit. At the top, there's two springs that are identical. This is the new one here, and that is called the shoe to anchor spring. Behind the shoe to anchor spring is the shoe guide plate, which we will be reusing. Directly underneath that is the strut, which is a piece of metal that we will also be reusing, and we will be replacing the spring with this new one here. At the bottom of the assembly, there is a longer spring that looks like this, and that is called the adjusting wheel spring. Next to that, these pieces are screwed together and is called the adjuster assembly. On either side, there are these pieces of metal. It's a combination of this piece here and this piece pushed together with one of these springs on it. I'm going to be reusing this long metal piece that's on the car because it has a place for a flathead screwdriver to fit into, and this new one does not. And that will make it very difficult to reinstall. That's it. Those are all the components of the parking brake assembly. At this point in the process, we're going to remove the old springs, starting with the top two right here. Use a flathead screwdriver, and you're going to want to wear your impact gloves during this step. Also use some pliers and take the spring off. Since we're going to be replacing the spring, you don't have to worry about the condition of the spring. There's one of them. And there's the second one. Let's go ahead and remove this guide plate that we'll be reusing and set it aside. And now we'll be removing the lower spring. And there's that spring right there. Once you have removed that, you can lightly pull these apart. Remove the spring from the strut and slide the strut out of there. We will be reusing this metal piece as well. And for reference, this spring goes on this side. The other side is completely different. Now that we've removed all the springs, the adjuster assembly is the only thing remaining. I'm going to leave that in there so I can see the spacing that it is at without removing it. It will fall out once I remove these pieces. The removal of this pin is a little tricky because there's this small hole that it slides into and then twists to lock in. So you're just rotating enough to where it will come out of this slot right there. And if you look, you can actually see it from the back side if that's easier. The adjusting assembly fell off as expected, and we can see how big the gap is. Now if you did unscrew this, you can see how big the gap is based on where it's clean and not clean. And here's the shoe lining. Let's go ahead and remove the other side the same way by removing the pin. Now when you remove this other side, it is attached here to a metal plate that's connected to the cable that is attached to your parking brake inside the car. Go ahead and rotate this over and you'll see a horseshoe shape sized clip here that you will need to pry off with a flathead screwdriver. Once you've been able to pry this horseshoe off, which we almost have completed here, there we go. Once you pry that off, there's going to be an O-ring on here. That's just a thin piece of metal. Your new kit came with this, so don't worry about reusing that or if it's damaged. And now this just slides right off. The next step, and this is one of the hardest, is to put the ring back on and the horseshoe clip. Now, when I first got the parking brakes for this vehicle from AutoZone, they gave me ones that don't work. This metal post is not long enough. So I ended up having to go to O'Reilly's and get ones that do have a long enough metal post. Slides in there, and I have enough room to be able to put the O-ring on and the horseshoe clip. For ease of use, I have removed my impact gloves. Don't forget to put them back on. Now, what I discovered as an easier way to accomplish this task is to put this on here to prevent it from sliding in the groove that your horseshoe clip needs to go into. Take some of these and hold it in position. All right, once you have the O-ring held in a secure position, you should be able to, easier than not, slide the horseshoe ring in here. It is still very difficult to get it in there, for good cause. All right, now that it's slid in there, go ahead and take your needle nose pliers and crimp the horseshoe bracket around as tight as you can. Is take the metal pins. Again, I'm reusing mine because they have the flathead screwdriver indent in them, and replace them with all the newer parts that you get in the kit. And a new spring. This is the second most difficult part. When you put this guide bracket in, make sure that the flat side is facing towards the hub of the wheel. When installing the two springs up here, you want to make sure that you install the correct one before the other one, or you have to pull the spring off. And by correct, what I mean is when you took the springs off, they were layered, where one was in the back and one was in the front, and they were like this. So in my particular case, the right side spring needs to go in first. There's a small hole here that this hooks into, and then you pull and stretch it. Now we place the first spring on there and slide it back to try to hold this plate in position. Preparation for installing the second spring. There you have it. Now, one thing I forgot to put in, but it's not too late, is this strut assembly. Insert the new spring on. We're going to slide it in here and into position. Let me show you how this is going in. I'm sliding this piece into here and this piece onto here. Nope, it's impossible. And because I mistakenly did that and I don't want to deal with these springs again, I just removed the pin from this side so I can slide the strut into position. And onto here. Alright, there we go. The next thing we need to do is install this adjuster assembly. So go ahead and screw these two pieces together. So to show where it's going to be, this will attach in here and on this side. And then we will unscrew it, which will push these apart. Now before we unscrew it too much, we have one last spring to install. This one here. There are these two grooves here that this attaches to and attaches over here. So choose one place to put it into and then use pliers to stretch it into the other hole right there. Now that that spring is installed, we can move the adjustment wheel, which we will have to move that spring slightly out of the way that we just installed, so that we can twist that adjuster freely. And that is all there is to replacing the parking brake. The next step is we will go ahead and put the rotor back in position, moving the caliper up and out of the way. We will replace the brake pad on the other side, and then putting the caliper back over it. The next thing we'll do is replace or put back this rubber seal and reinsert the bolt into the caliper, making sure to line it up with the rubber seal. The last and final step is to put your wheel back on. Of course, once we lower the car, we will tighten it properly. Finally, let's jack up the car a little bit so that we can remove our jack stand. And then slowly release the jack to the ground. The last and final step is to tighten the lug nuts properly. I have a torque wrench here, which I will set to 80 foot-pounds. And I will tighten these in a star pattern.